A question rarely raised in society, but invariably troubling many men who have reached a certain stage in life. What is the role of a woman in a man's life after 60? This topic, as if forbidden, is avoided, perhaps for fear of touching on personal experiences and vulnerabilities. However, it concerns millions of men around the world who are on the verge of rethinking their existence. It is during this period, when children have grown up and left the parental home, career ambitions have given way to well-deserved rest, and the noisy bustle is replaced by a peaceful silence, that a man faces the need to answer one of the most important questions. What does he really need for happiness? Traditionally, it is believed that in old age a man should strive to create or maintain relationships with a woman, enjoy the comfort of home, and feel the support of a loved one. However, more and more men, contrary to expectations, choose solitude. Some decide to divorce, others refuse new relationships, and still others stop looking for a partner altogether. And this is not always a consequence of past grievances or disappointments. Often it is a conscious choice, due to maturity and a reassessment of values. What is the secret of this phenomenon? Why do members of the stronger sex, having spent decades side by side, suddenly decide to set off on their own? What drives them? A desire to escape the bonds of love, or a thirst for finding their true selves? Today, we will try to understand the 8 key factors that push men over 60 to choose solitude, and ask ourselves the question, is this the path to long-awaited freedom, or just a new facet of a lonely life? With the arrival of his 7th decade, a man discovers a previously unknown feeling, inner freedom, which previously remained in the shadow of everyday worries. For many years, his life was subject to a sense of duty: work, family, raising the younger generation, solving pressing household and financial issues. But now this period is over. The children have flown the nest, career peaks have been conquered, and a soothing silence reigns in the house where life once bustled. It is in this silence that a man, for the first time in a long time, has the opportunity to hear the voice of his soul. He realizes that he is no longer burdened by obligations to others. There is no longer any need for explanations, excuses, haste, or compromises. Instead, an inalienable right appears, the right to dispose of one's own life at one's own discretion, without regard to other people's expectations and imposed obligations. The freedom to dispose of one's time and choose activities to one's liking at any age can cause a feeling of incredible lightness and even delight. Many men find in this experience echoes of their youthful years, but not those that were full of violent passions, but those when there was enough room for dreams and the realization of personal desires. For example, 61-year-old Yuri, after his divorce, realized that throughout his life he had put the interests of others above his own. Now he enjoys traveling, is passionately working on his memoirs, and starts each day with a health run in the forest. Loneliness has freed him from having to answer to anyone and meet other people's expectations. This newfound sense of complete freedom of action has become a real revelation for him. Psychotherapists note that a man who encounters loneliness for the first time often experiences a feeling of inner liberation that is difficult to achieve within the framework of a permanent relationship. Viktor Frankl, the founder of logotherapy, argued that the meaning of life is not imposed from the outside, but arises from a sense of one's own freedom. Erich Fromm, in turn, emphasized that a person's maturity is manifested in the ability to make choices, guided not by fear, but by an understanding of their true desires. Thus, the desire for freedom in the age after 60 is not just a manifestation of a rebellious spirit or whim, but a conscious return to oneself and the opportunity to live life in accordance with one's values, even at the sunset of one's days. The second reason that keeps men from remarrying lies in the ingrained habit of being alone. A state that was initially perceived as transient, over time transforms into a stable way of life. A man who has experienced a divorce or the loss of a loved one initially feels a gaping void, but gradually masters this new, obligation-free space. Over the years, loneliness loses its painfulness, turning into a kind of comfort zone where a clear, convenient daily routine is formed, in which everything is subject to personal needs and desires without any external pressure or the need to adapt to other people's interests. In such a situation, no one demands compliance with someone else's expectations, no one exercises control, does not make reproaches, and does not disturb the hard-won inner peace. This stability takes on an almost sacred meaning. Any attempt to disrupt it is perceived as an unwelcome intrusion, a threat to the loss of the achieved equilibrium. A man accustomed to a solitary existence does not feel the desire to readjust to someone else's habits, quirks, and emotional displays. Valerie, 66 years old, experienced something similar. After his divorce, he didn't immediately reconcile himself to loneliness, but after several years, he came to the realization that he was happy in his current state. His morning begins with a cup of aromatic coffee in absolute silence. No one interferes with his plans, and he is not obliged to give any explanations. Friends who are married sometimes remark with a touch of envy, "You are absolutely free." In response, he merely smiles and states, "I'm just used to it." According to psychologists, the desire for solitude in mature age is not simply a matter of convenience in everyday life, but a deeply rooted psychological need. The renowned psychologist Carl Jung called this phenomenon the process of individuation, implying a return to the true essence of the personality. Over time, a person becomes less inclined to play roles imposed by society and more inclined toward authenticity. Solitude provides a unique opportunity to shed the masks worn under the influence of social expectations and serves as a kind of mirror reflecting the true self. A man learns to accept and understand himself, and this process brings him satisfaction. And the question naturally arises, is it worth disrupting this inner harmony by letting someone into your life who could destroy it? Another important factor is the reduced need for physical intimacy. With age, intimate closeness loses the sharpness and significance it had in youth, giving way to deeper emotional experiences. A man who has crossed the 60-year mark increasingly seeks not passionate affairs, but tranquility, mutual understanding, and spiritual harmony. His priorities change, and physical attraction ceases to be the central element of life. Moreover, negative experiences from past relationships, especially painful breakups, can create an internal barrier that prevents new connections. Roman 67 openly shares his experience. "I've been through several difficult breakups, and now I feel much calmer alone. I no longer want to risk my soul by giving it to someone who could hurt me." For him, comfort lies in stability and the absence of emotional upheaval. He has found satisfaction in reading, gardening, and nature photography, and these activities bring him genuine joy. From a psychological perspective, such a metamorphosis seems quite natural. Sigmund Freud defined this phenomenon as sublimation, a complex mechanism by which energy, initially oriented toward physical attraction, undergoes transformation, finding an outlet in creative or intellectual activity. In other words, carnal passion is replaced by inspiration in art, and instead of competitive struggles for the attention of others, there are deep reflections on fundamental questions of existence. Modern scientific research in the field of geriatrics convincingly proves that the fading of libido in men is by no means synonymous with the end of an active life. On the contrary, it marks the beginning of a new, no less fulfilling stage. In mature age, life energy takes on more refined forms, becomes deeper, and is directed inward toward self-discovery. A man, freed from the relentless pressure of instincts, gains the long-awaited freedom to delve into his inner world, his true interests and passions. Intimate relationships begin to be perceived not as simple physical interaction, but as a profound dialogue between two souls striving for spiritual unity. Many men at this stage of life begin to realize that intimacy is, first and foremost, a huge responsibility, not just a source of pleasure. That is why they consciously avoid casual relationships, striving for deeper and more meaningful connections. This should not be seen as an escape from reality or a manifestation of fear. Rather, it is a conscious transition to a qualitatively different level, where inner harmony and agreement with oneself are valued much more than constant confirmation of one's attractiveness in the eyes of others. And if the physical body gradually recedes into the background, then the spiritual component of the personality, on the contrary, comes to the fore, determining the future path of life. The fourth reason lies in the desire to dedicate the rest of one's days to oneself. Upon reaching the age of 60, men begin to keenly feel the transience of existence. Reflections on death, which previously seemed abstract, penetrate everyday thoughts. This awareness does not necessarily instill fear, but rather awakens a thirst for life. Every new day is seen as a priceless gift that should not be wasted. A man asks himself, if not now, then when? He addresses himself with sincere questions. What has been missed? What dreams were never realized? What would I like to experience while I still have the strength? More and more often, the choice is made in favor of joy over obligation, freedom over compromise, and personal desires over the expectations of others. Artem, 64, who dedicated his life to accounting, was always devoted to his family and put off his hobbies for an indefinite later. After retiring, he picked up a brush for the first time and discovered the world of painting, which became a way for him to express himself. Soon this hobby was complemented by short trips to his native places, where he once again felt the taste of life, as in his youth. He frankly admits, "I am living for myself for the first time, and it is wonderful." Such stories are becoming more common. Today, many men consciously reject the prospect of new relationships, fearing the stress, disagreements, and additional obligations that may arise. They no longer strive to adapt to someone else's schedule, share personal space, or account for their actions. The renowned philosopher and psychotherapist Irvin Yalom argued that the awareness of the finitude of existence does not constrain but rather encourages active engagement. In his view, the awareness of the inevitable end pushes us to live the remaining years as fully, deeply, and freely as possible. Therefore, many men choose loneliness not because of past pain, but because of a mature understanding that it is time to live in harmony with themselves and enjoy life. Perhaps it is in this decision that they find the mature joy that they so lacked in the years when they were burdened with responsibility and self-sacrifice. Another reason is the fear of repeating past mistakes. Over the years, men accumulate not only life experience, but also emotional trauma. Divorces, betrayals, infidelities, and prolonged conflicts all leave an indelible mark on their souls. Even if the emotional wounds have healed, memories of past pain and disappointment do not disappear without a trace. A man who has faced negative experiences in relationships begins to perceive new unions with caution, seeing them as a potential threat. The fear of falling back into destructive relationships where one has to sacrifice oneself, endure, and suppress one's own interests becomes decisive. Every new woman is seen not as a source of inspiration, but as a possible source of anxiety. Instead of romantic dreams, images of future arguments, misunderstandings, attempts at control, and painful breakups arise. That is why many men consciously avoid getting close even when they feel sympathy. Mikhail, a 69-year-old man who survived a difficult divorce that dealt a crushing blow to his emotional and financial state, is no longer willing to risk entering new relationships. He has created a calm and measured life where he feels safe. "I don't want to start all over again," he admits. "What I built alone cost me too much, and it's not just about everyday comforts, but also about inner balance." Mikhail has found a harmony he didn't know before, and he doesn't intend to put it at new risk. In psychology, this phenomenon is seen as a protective reaction to a past trauma, when a person instinctively avoids repeating the pain. It's like being afraid to burn yourself on a cup, even if it's already cooled down. Such caution does not always indicate bitterness or a loss of the ability to love. On the contrary, a man may remain a deeply feeling and kind person, but these qualities are now hidden behind a mask of caution. He is not closed to relationships, but he is always on guard. Psychologists emphasize that traumatic experiences, especially in adulthood, can change attachment styles. A person becomes less trusting, more reserved, and less willing to take emotional risks. And although it may seem from the outside that he is simply avoiding intimacy, in reality he is protecting the inner peace that he has found with such difficulty. Ultimately, loneliness may not be a rejection of love, but a desire for the peace of mind that was once destroyed. The sixth reason lies in the entrenched distrust of women. Over the years, men, having accumulated life experience, begin to look at women no longer through the prism of youthful infatuation, but rather from the position of an outside observer who has gone through the crucible of trials. This skepticism does not arise out of nowhere, but is a consequence of personal failures, deception, betrayal, and situations where true feelings were replaced by selfish motives. Once burned, a man becomes doubly cautious. He begins to pay attention to details that previously escaped his attention: an excessive interest in material goods, feigned goodwill, sophisticated manipulations. Over time, this evolves into a guarded attitude towards many women, especially those who enter his life after he turns 60. In his eyes, sincerity becomes something extraordinary, and trust is an unjustified risk. Pavel, 63, shares his story. A few years ago, he met a woman who initially surrounded him with tenderness and care, but later began to reproach him for every penny. She didn't hide her expectations of financial support, and for the lack of generosity, she rewarded him with offensive epithets, calling him callous and stingy. This bitter experience left an indelible mark of disappointment on his soul. "I realized that sincere women are like rare copies of old books," he says sadly. "Their search requires a lot of time and effort, which becomes less with age." Since then, Pavel has not sought new relationships, preferring to spend time with friends, tending to his beloved garden, and indulging in reading. In modern society, where the culture of consumption occupies a central place, external signs of success such as wealth, social status, and material possessions are relentlessly promoted, having a profound impact on interpersonal relationships. This phenomenon leads to the erosion of established moral principles such as loyalty, patience, and genuine sincerity. In such conditions, men increasingly feel that they are expected not to show feelings, but rather to make profitable offers and provide material security. This perception forces them to erect protective barriers, as no one wants to be reduced to the role of a simple source of funding or a convenient tool in someone else's plans. Experts in the field of psychology note an increase in the level of anxiety in men when starting new relationships, especially when they have certain property, savings, or a stable income. Distrust becomes a kind of defense mechanism, although it is accompanied by a feeling of bitterness from loneliness. Despite the fact that in his heart a man may strive for intimacy and emotional connection, the fear of being used for selfish purposes turns out to be stronger. As a result, he prefers solitude, finding in it, at least, honesty and the absence of hypocrisy. Another important reason why men choose loneliness is the desire to focus on spiritual development. Over time, they increasingly turn to questions that they previously put aside. As time becomes more available and the everyday hustle and bustle recedes, reflections on the meaning of life, purpose, and the deep nature of being arise in this silence. Everyday chores, which once seemed important, lose their significance, and material goals cease to be a source of inspiration, giving way to inner search and self-knowledge. A man turns to solitude not because of bitterness or exhaustion, but because of a deep conviction that only in silence does he find the opportunity to hear the voice of his true self. He directs his search for answers not into external dialogues, but into internal reflections, into the pages of books, into the contemplation of nature, into prayerful appeals, or meditative practices. This process is not an escape from reality, but on the contrary, an approach to its quintessence. An example of this is the story of Oleg, a 70-year-old man who, having retired, devoted himself entirely to the study of spiritual literature, philosophical treatises, and religious teachings. He began to practice meditation, attend church, keep a diary, where he wrote down his thoughts. His days are now filled not with meaningless chatter, but with meaningful silence. I don't need a lot of words, he shares. I strive not for external love, but for internal integrity. He lives in a modest house on the outskirts, surrounded by volumes of books, flickering candles, and old thoughts of wise men. One of his favorite philosophers is Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor Stoic, who uttered, "Find peace within yourself, and then you will be able to live in harmony with the world around you." These words became a kind of compass for Oleg. He realized that true peace does not come from the outside, but is born within. Philosophers and spiritual mentors of all times and peoples have argued that maturity is the best period for inner growth. Leo Tolstoy, in the last years of his life, also moved away from worldly vanity and sought truth in simplicity and spiritual cleansing. The spiritual path requires space, both physical and mental, and often only solitude can provide a person with this necessary space. In such a state, a mature man does not reject love as such. Rather, he strives for its more sublime manifestation, in harmony with truth, the environment, higher powers. And a woman who is nearby during this period can be perceived not as a faithful companion, but as a potential factor distracting from the main thing, self-knowledge and spiritual growth. The eighth reason could be social overload and a re-evaluation of life priorities. After many years spent in constant communication, following social norms and satisfying the requests of others, a man may feel deeply exhausted. This is not just about physical fatigue, but also about emotional exhaustion from endless conversations, responsibilities, and the need to meet the expectations of those around him. Business negotiations, family celebrations, resolving other people's problems. All of this, accumulating over the years, suppresses the need for external connections. And then comes a moment of realization when a man suddenly realizes that he no longer strives for noisy parties, does not need to discuss the latest events, and does not seek confirmation of his actions. There is a radical change in priorities. What is really important to him now? Authenticity of feelings, peace, simplicity of existence, and personal emotional balance. In the life of Andrei, who reached the age of 68, radical changes occurred after his well-deserved retirement. He consciously abandoned his usual social circle and social events, sold his city apartment, and chose a secluded life in the countryside. Now his days are filled with contemplation of nature, reading, and leisurely walks along a picturesque lake. I am not running away from the world, he claims, but a person who has found the opportunity to live in harmony with his true aspirations. The silence of phone calls does not burden him, but brings a sense of satisfaction. Far from the bustle of the city, he felt real freedom. Famous existentialist philosophers, such as Jean-Paul Sartre and Viktor Frankl, argued that it is in solitude that a person is able to comprehend their deepest desires, freed from the influence of society, family, and professional obligations. Re-evaluation of life values is a natural stage of maturity. A man begins to clearly understand where he lived, following the prescriptions of others, and where he lived according to the dictates of his own heart. Social roles, husband, friend, colleague, companion, gradually lose their significance, giving way to a desire for authenticity, to being alone with oneself, without social masks and imposed expectations. At such moments, even the closest relationships can be perceived as a burden, taking away precious time intended for self-discovery. This is not a manifestation of resentment towards others, but a deep need for peace. And if inner harmony is born in this state of peace, a man is in no hurry to disturb it, even for the sake of love. After all, as Viktor Frankl rightly noted, the meaning of life cannot be brought from the outside. It originates in the silence of personal experiences and reflections. The question of the possibility of male happiness in solitude provokes lively discussions. Undoubtedly, solitude provides unique advantages: peace, a sense of freedom, and the silence so valued over the years. However, how fully can happiness blossom away from human warmth and intimacy? Self-sufficiency is certainly a sign of maturity and inner strength. But we should not forget about the social nature of man, about his deep need for emotional connection. Even the strongest and most confident man sometimes needs to feel someone's presence nearby, without reproaches and expectations, but with sincere warmth. A woman in a man's life is not just a fellow traveler, but a source of inspiration, tenderness, and emotional support. Her presence transforms the home, filling it with comfort and a desire to return. It is next to her that a man finds the opportunity to be vulnerable while remaining himself. Alfred Adler, a well-known psychologist, argued that a person's personality is fully revealed only in interaction with other people, in acts of communication, care, and empathy. The absence of these elements can lead to stagnation of personal growth. In turn, American psychologist John Gottman, who has devoted decades to studying marital relationships, came to the conclusion that it is the deep emotional connection between partners that is the key to longevity and mental health. The latest scientific research convincingly demonstrates that men surrounded by an atmosphere of stable and heartfelt relationships are significantly less likely to suffer from depressive states. They demonstrate more rapid recovery after illnesses and maintain unwavering self-confidence, even when gray hair touches their temples. The gentle support of a loved one is like a shield that protects against destructive stress, strengthens the body's defenses, and, most notably, contributes to an increase in life expectancy. Emotional intimacy becomes a real elixir, healing not only heart wounds, but also giving harmony to the soul. And although solitude can give valuable moments of self-discovery and independence, it can never replace the warmth of loving hands ready to support you in difficult times. At a certain point in his life, every man faces an important decision, perhaps one of the most intimate and significant, to remain proudly alone or to open his heart to another person. This choice should not be dictated by social stereotypes, intrusive fears, or someone else's pressure. It should stem from the depths of the soul, from a sincere answer to the question, what do I really crave? Loneliness can certainly be a source of inner strength, providing peace and promoting deep self-analysis. It helps to form an unwavering inner core, find desired tranquility, and complete freedom of action. However, it is important to remember that solitude is not an end goal, but just one stage in life's journey. After all, love and closeness are also manifestations of strength, a subtle but incredibly powerful energy capable of healing emotional wounds, inspiring new achievements, and filling life with new meaning, even when many years have already passed. For women, mature age is not a sunset, but rather the dawn of a new era, an exciting stage where a woman appears in a completely different light. No longer just a mother or a life partner, she is a complete, self-confident, and attractive person. She has the right to devote herself to her hobbies, make plans, take bold steps, draw inspiration, and share it with the world. Being alone does not equate to feeling abandoned, especially if it is a deliberate decision dictated by inner convictions. However, if a desire for love, trust, and building strong relationships matures in the depths of the soul, this is not a sign of weakness, but rather a sign of maturity and courage. As Esther Perel rightly emphasizes, Maturity is not a departure from active life, but a chance to shine even brighter. In turn, Paulo Coelho reminded us that life always provides an opportunity to start over. The main thing is to be ready for it. Maturity, wisdom, balanced decisions, inner harmony, and the strength of human connections. This is what we will be talking about. We will talk about what often remains behind the scenes, and together we will look for answers to important life questions. In the comments to the article, readers share their thoughts on loneliness in old age, entering into a kind of dialogue about how to meet this period of life. Each voice is important as personal stories and reflections become a source of inspiration for further publications dedicated to complex and topical issues of aging and self-determination. Readers urge each other not to remain indifferent, to share their experiences and choices made in life in order to jointly create meaningful and honest content.